I've never been good at hiding my feelings, especially when I'm angry. Whenever something's bothering me, it's written all over my face. My jaw clenches, my palms get sweaty, and I can't seem to keep my voice steady. So I guess it's no surprise that when I found out about her, I didn't hold back. It was a typical Tuesday, and I was just starting my shift at work when a coworker of mine pulled me aside with that look in her eyes, like she knew some secret I desperately needed to hear but wasn't sure I was ready for. She leaned in just enough so no one else could overhear, and her voice was low and shaky. "You might want to sit down. I saw her and Mark leaving a hotel yesterday, together." My stomach dropped. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her or maybe she'd just gotten the wrong impression. But then she handed me a crumpled receipt from the hotel lobby, and I saw the time stamp, right around the time I was telling everyone I was pregnant. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I stared at the paper, my fingers trembling. It was like the world suddenly slowed down, everything muffled except that tiny paper with her betrayal written in black ink. I remember my skin felt clammy, like I'd just run a marathon, even though I hadn't moved from that spot. As I looked at her, part of me stared blankly. How long had they planned this? Did they know I was pregnant when they started? Those questions spun around my head, but the truth was obvious enough. There was no way this was some random coincidence. They'd been sneaking around, hiding it from me, probably for weeks. I could feel my fists clenching so hard my nails dug into my palms. I remember my coworker's voice, soft but trembling with guilt. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to come tell you this, but I thought you deserved to know." I nodded, numb, but inside I felt my blood boiling. I wanted to scream at her, tell her she was disgusting, that she'd betrayed her best friend so cruelly. I wanted to lash out, but instead I just nodded and whispered, "Thanks for telling me." My voice was barely a whisper. I turned away before anyone could see the tears forming in my eyes, but I knew they weren't tears of sadness. They were burning, angry tears. Walking back to my desk, my mind kept replaying that scene, her leaving that hotel, her smile, his stupid smirk. It all fit so perfectly with the gut feeling I'd had for weeks but refused to acknowledge. I'd seen the little signs, the strange texts, the way she'd always been more distant lately. I'd ignored the signs because I was scared of the truth. Now I knew. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way I felt so stupid for not seeing it sooner. How did I miss all the red flags? How did I not realize he was hiding something? I'd been so excited, so hopeful. I told everyone I was pregnant, and now I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, lied to, used, and betrayed by the people I trusted most. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this slide. But I also knew I didn't want to just confront her in a calm, civil way. I needed a plan, a way to make them regret this, to show them I was stronger than their betrayal. That's when I started thinking about revenge. Not the petty kind, but the kind that hits where it hurts. I spent the night barely sleeping, my mind racing. I could see their faces, smug and confident, and I hated that I'd let it get this far. I had to act smart. I had to make sure they understood that I wasn't the kind of person to be taken for granted or discarded. I'd been the loyal wife, the supportive partner, and this was how they repaid me. I'd tear their little game apart. I'd make them wish they'd never crossed me, but first I needed evidence. Solid proof. Something they wouldn't expect, something that would blow up in their faces when I finally revealed it. I'd start with small steps, gathering info, watching, listening. Because the moment I confronted them, it had to be done right. They needed to see that I wasn't just hurt. I was furious, calculating, and ready to fight back. As I lay there in the dark, my hand clenched into a fist, I realized this was only the beginning. The betrayal ran deep, but I was about to turn that pain into a weapon. They had no idea what I was planning, and I intended to keep it that way. Now I just had to figure out how to start. The days that followed were a blur of planning and quiet fury. I kept my face neutral at work, pretending everything was normal, but inside my mind was a storm. I walked around with my senses heightened, every conversation, every glance feeling like a clue. I needed more than just her word or that crumpled receipt. They could lie, manipulate, cover their tracks. I had to be smarter than that. I started with subtle surveillance. My phone became my spy, recording conversations when I thought no one was paying attention, and I installed a few hidden apps to track their phones. I didn't want to get caught, but I needed proof. I watched her social media, scanning for any clues, any sign that she'd been sneaking around long before I found out. Nothing obvious yet, but I knew she was clever. Still, I kept digging. One evening, I went through her things when she was out. I wasn't proud of snooping. Hell, I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to see what she'd hidden. I found her phone tucked in her purse, and without much hesitation, I unlocked it with her passcode, something I'd remembered from a moment of carelessness. I scrolled through her messages, her photos, her emails. Nothing concrete, just the usual flirtatious texts with Mark, some late-night messages that made my stomach churn. Then I found it, an email draft saved in her inbox. I hesitated, my finger trembling as I clicked open. The subject line was, "We need to talk." My eyes widened as I read the message. It was a detailed plan, times, places, everything. They'd been coordinating for weeks, maybe longer. The hotel, the cover stories, even excuses to use if I ever questioned her. That was the moment I realized how deep this betrayal went. It wasn't just a one-night thing. They'd been planning this for a while. My heart hammered in my chest. My fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. I had to hold back from smashing her phone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, then shoved everything back into its place and left the room quietly. The next step was obvious. I needed a way to turn her own secrets against her. I contacted a private investigator, discreet, professional, someone I could trust to find out how much they'd been scheming. I wasn't about to confront her blindly. I wanted undeniable proof. While I waited for the intel, I started thinking about my next move. I couldn't just explode and let her see my pain. That would make me vulnerable. Instead, I planned to outsmart her. I'd let her believe she was still in control, but I'd be the one pulling the strings. I planned to find a way to make her regret everything, her lies, her betrayal, her stupidity. Throughout all this, I kept asking myself, how long had they been planning this? Had she been cheating on me before the pregnancy news, or was I just a convenient target? Did Mark always see her as more than a friend? These questions haunted me, but I pushed them aside. What mattered was that I was gathering evidence, building my case. When I finally confronted her, I'd do it with everything on my side. One night I sat in my dim apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at the phone I'd secretly taken pictures of her messages with. My mind was cold now, no longer the hurt, naive man I used to be. I was calculating. I knew her secrets and I was ready to use them. I had a plan. It was risky, but it would hit where it hurt, the truth. I wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable, just like I felt now. I'd wait for the right moment, then unleash everything. Her lies, her deception, everything she'd tried to hide. I didn't want just to hurt her. I wanted her to realize the damage she'd done wasn't just to me, but to herself. And Mark, he wasn't getting away with it either. I had something planned for him, too. Something that would make him regret crossing that line, crossing me. I didn't want to destroy his life. I just wanted him to see the consequences of his betrayal. It was about sending a message. Nobody messes with me and gets away with it. As I sat there, the cold metal of the keychain in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. That was the last piece I needed. Tomorrow, I'd execute the next step. I didn't know exactly how it would go down, but I knew I was ready. I'd been betrayed at my most vulnerable, and now I was going to make sure they understood that I wasn't someone to mess with. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight inside me, the mixture of anger and determination. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my dignity. They thought they could walk all over me, but I was about to remind them who I was, and when the moment came, I would strike. Hard. The next morning, I woke up with that sharp edge of resolve. I'd had enough of waiting and watching. It was time to put my plan into motion, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I spent the day preparing, making sure every detail was set. I wanted her to see that I wasn't some naive fool anymore. I was dangerous when crossed. I went to the store and bought a burner phone, an anonymous, untraceable device I could use to communicate without risking my current number. It was cheap, easy to operate, and I'd use it to start sending her messages, carefully crafted to make her nervous, paranoid even. I wanted her to think I was onto her, that I knew everything. That way, She'd start unraveling on her own. I also printed out some screenshots of her messages with Mark, the email draft I'd found, and evidence of their planning. I kept those in a folder, hidden away for now but ready to be used when the moment was right. Every step had to be calculated. I couldn't afford a mistake. That evening, I sent the first message. It was simple but chilling enough to make her wonder if I knew more than I did. I used the burner to text. I know everything. You can't hide from me anymore. I kept the tone cold, almost clinical. I wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable. That's when I decided to escalate. I waited a few hours, then sent another message. This isn't over, watch your back. No signature, no clues, just a direct threat. I knew she'd be nervous, maybe even terrified. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to feel like she was losing control, like everything was about to blow up in her face. In the meantime, I kept observing her. She grew more distant, more anxious. I could see it in her eyes, the way she'd check her phone obsessively, the way she'd look over her shoulder like she was waiting for something to happen. Perfect. She was starting to crack and I was just getting started. The best part, she had no idea I was behind it. I kept my voice calm when I finally confronted her face to face, but inside I was seething. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, I know what you've been doing, how long? Her face drained of color and she stammered, what are you talking about? I leaned in closer, voice low and sharp. I've seen the messages. The plans, you and Mark, you've been cheating on me since before I announced I was pregnant. Her eyes flicked away, but I caught the flicker of guilt, of panic. That was all I needed. You thought you could get away with it, I continued. But I've got everything, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me anymore. I let the last words hang in the air, heavy and threatening. She looked like a cornered animal, searching for an escape route, but I had already sealed her fate with my quiet, calculated revenge. That confrontation was just the beginning. I knew she'd try to deny, try to spin it somehow, but I had the evidence. I had her trapped. The next move was to make her realize she crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She'd been so confident, so smug, now she was trembling, and I loved that feeling of power. This was my revenge, and I was just getting started. The fallout was immediate. I saw her retreating into herself, avoiding eye contact, trying to pretend nothing was happening. But I knew better. She was unraveling, and it felt good. I could hear her whispering to herself, probably trying to come up with some lie to save face, but her facade was cracking. I stayed calm, cold. You should figure out what's more important, your lies or the truth, because I'm done playing nice. If you think this is over, you're dead wrong. I turned and left her standing there, trembling and silent. I didn't need to rub it in. I just wanted her to know I was serious. That night, I blocked her on every social media platform. I deleted her number from my phone, cut her out of my life like she was nothing. I knew this was the start of something bigger, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had the proof, the plan, and the resolve. I didn't need her anymore. One thing was clear. I was finally taking control of this mess I'd been caught in. And I wasn't about to let her or Mark destroy what little dignity I had left. I'd rebuild, stronger than ever. But I also knew I'd never forget the sting of that betrayal, and I'd always be ready if they tried to come back. The question now was what to do with the evidence I had. Was I going to confront her again or let her sweat until she begged me for mercy? Either way, I knew I'd find the perfect moment. Because revenge, I learned, was all about patience, waiting for the right time to strike hardest. After that confrontation, I spent the next few days watching her carefully, barely sleeping. I needed her to feel like she was losing her grip, to make her more desperate, more predictable. Every time she looked at her phone or glanced nervously over her shoulder, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. She was unraveling, and I was the one tightening the noose. I kept up the silent harassment through the burner app, sending her small, cryptic messages. Nothing explicit, just enough to keep her paranoid. Things like "you're not safe" or "I see you." It wasn't much, but I knew it was enough to make her question everything. That was the point. I wanted her to second-guess herself, to realize she'd crossed a line she couldn't undo. One afternoon, she came home from work looking exhausted, her eyes shadowed, her hands trembling slightly as she poured herself a glass of wine. I watched her from across the room, trying to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want her to suspect I was behind this. Not yet. I stayed quiet, but inside I was already planning the next step, the one that would finally make her understand she had gone too far. Finally, I decided it was time for a more direct move. I wanted her to know I had all the cards, that I'd been collecting everything. I printed out copies of every message, every email, every detail I had uncovered. I placed them all in a folder and left it on her pillow when she wasn't paying attention. I made sure she saw it when she went to bed. That night I sat in the living room watching her open the folder slowly. Her breath hitched as she flipped through the pages, her face draining of color with each revelation. I kept my voice steady but cold. "You lied to me about everything, huh? You thought you could get away with it." She looked up, eyes shimmering with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear. I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I scoffed. "You didn't mean to, that's rich. You planned this for weeks, didn't you? Watched me glow with happiness, then decided to betray me right when I needed you the most." Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but I cut her off. "I've got all the proof. Every lie, every secret, every damn plan you had with Mark. And I'm sick of pretending this doesn't destroy everything we had. So tell me, how long has this been going on?" Her voice broke. "It was just once, I swear. Saving your ass with that lie won't save you," I said sharply. "I've had enough of your bullshit. You're done. You thought I'd just roll over and forgive you, not a chance." That was the moment I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. She looked small, defeated, and that was exactly how I wanted her to feel. I told her to pack her things. She'd be leaving, not just for tonight, but for good. I wasn't going to keep living in a house filled with lies. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I had no intention of giving her an inch, not after everything she'd done. I wanted her to understand that I was serious about ending this, about reclaiming my life. The lawyer told me what I needed to do: file for divorce, get a restraining order if necessary, and make sure every piece of evidence was documented. I also reached out to a close friend, someone I trusted implicitly. I told her everything: how I'd been betrayed, how I'd planned my revenge, and what I was about to do. She listened quietly, then said, "Good. You're finally standing up for yourself. Don't let her drag you down anymore." That day, I handed her the keys and told her she had until the end of the week to leave. I watched her pack her things with a mixture of fury and relief. As she left, she looked back at me, eyes red and puffy. I just stood there, cold and unshaken. I knew I'd done what I had to do. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, I finally felt a weight lift. I'd taken control, taken back my life. That betrayal had almost broken me, but instead I'd turned it into my power. I'd shown her that I wasn't someone to trifle with, that I could be patient and ruthless when needed. Looking back, I realize I'd been so naive before. I gave her too much trust, too much room to breathe, but no more. I learned that sometimes the only way to heal is to cut out the poison entirely. And I was done with her, done with the lies, and done with pretending everything was okay. The lesson here: trust is fragile, and sometimes you have to fight for your peace. When someone crosses the line, especially with your own life, your own future, you have to be ready to cut them loose, no matter how painful it is. Because at the end of the day, nobody deserves to be betrayed and left to pick up the pieces alone. It's been a few weeks since she moved out, and honestly, I've never felt so clear-headed. The house is quiet now, no more sneaking around, no more lies echoing off the walls. I walk through it and feel this strange sense of freedom I didn't know I was craving. The betrayal cut deep, but I refused to let it define me. Instead, I used it as a catalyst to finally take control. Since she left, I've been reorganizing everything. I changed the locks, blocked her on every platform, and even went as far as to clean out the shared spaces. I wanted the house to feel like my own again, free of her shadow. Every step away from her presence feels like reclaiming a part of myself I had lost. But I wasn't just going to sit and wait. I had one more thing I needed to do, something that would seal the deal and send her the clearest message possible. I reached out to my lawyer and signed the final papers for divorce. It was a formality now, but it felt significant, like closing a chapter I no longer wanted anything to do with. That night, I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and wrote a letter. Not one I planned to send, but a cathartic release of everything I'd kept bottled up. I poured out my feelings: how betrayed I'd felt, how I'd been blindsided by her lies, how furious I was at her betrayal. I made sure to tone down the anger but kept enough of it in there to remind her she had lost everything. The next morning, I gathered all the evidence, all the proof I'd accumulated, screenshots, emails, her plan with Mark, and put them into a folder. I printed a copy so I could physically hand it over when the time came. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake anymore. It was about making sure she understood the damage she'd done, that her actions had consequences. I scheduled a meeting with her, knowing she'd probably try to beg or manipulate her way out of it, but I was ready. When she arrived, she looked fragile, her eyes red, her shoulders slumped. I didn't bother with small talk. I just handed her the folder and looked her straight in the eyes. "You lied to me, betrayed me, and devastated everything I thought we had," I said softly but firmly. "You thought you could get away with this. I've got everything, proof, receipts, everything. You're done. I want you to understand what you've lost here." She looked stunned, then defensive. "Please, I never meant," she started. I cut her off. "Save it. I don't want your excuses. I've moved on. You can come back when you're ready to be honest, but I won't be waiting." My voice was steady, but inside I was boiling. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to see that I was no longer vulnerable. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I could see the tears forming again. Good, that's what I wanted. I wanted her to understand that she had shattered something precious and she'd pay for it. I turned away and left her sitting there with the evidence. As I walked out the door, I whispered, "This is over." That one sentence felt like a heavy weight lifted. I was done playing the fool. Now I'm living my life again, slowly rebuilding. I've started seeing a counselor to help me process everything, but honestly, I feel lighter. No more secrets, no more lies. The house is peaceful, the future uncertain, but mine to shape. Looking back, I realize I wasted too much time trusting the wrong people, but I also learned how to fight, how to stand up for myself when everything was falling apart. I don't regret what I did. I regret trusting her in the first place. But that trust is gone now, replaced by a hard-earned sense of strength I never knew I had. If there's one thing I want others to take away from all this, it's that betrayal hurts like hell, but you're stronger than you think. Sometimes the only way to heal is to cut out the poison, no matter how much it hurts in the moment. Because at the end of the day, your peace is worth more than anyone's lies. The house is finally quiet, and I've learned to sit with the silence, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that I survived it. Every day, I wake up and remind myself that I'm stronger than I felt during those dark moments. I don't wake up with the ache of betrayal anymore. Instead, I feel a faint sense of pride, like I've taken back what was mine and turned it into something new. One thing I did was hand over the keys. I put them in an envelope, signed my name across the flap, and left it on her doorstep. No explanation, no fanfare, just that small act of finality. It felt right to leave her with that piece of my life, a symbol that I was done. I don't need to look back anymore. Everything I need is ahead of me. I also filed the final paperwork for my divorce. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about closure. I wanted to close that chapter and make space for something better. I knew I'd heal, that I'd find someone who deserved my trust, not someone who would betray me like that. Every now and then, I catch myself thinking about her, about how she thought she could get away with playing me for a fool. But I shrug it off. Those thoughts no longer hold power over me. What I do hold on to is the sense that I finally took control, that I refused to be a victim anymore. Looking back, I realize that the most important lesson I learned through all this is that betrayal reveals who you really are, your resilience, your strength, your ability to come back from the worst. I would have never imagined it, but the pain pushed me to stand up for myself in ways I hadn't before. It forced me to see that my value isn't defined by someone else's lies or betrayal. Now I focus on healing, on trusting myself again, and on building a future without the weight of that betrayal dragging me down. I've set boundaries, learned to listen to my gut, and most importantly, I've remembered that I don't have to accept betrayal or lies from anyone. My happiness depends on my ability to protect my peace, and I finally feel confident doing that. So, to anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts. Don't ignore the red flags and don't settle for less than you deserve. When betrayal happens, it's okay to feel devastated. Just don't let it define you. Use it as fuel to rebuild, to grow stronger, and to remind yourself that you're better off without the poison. I've learned that revenge isn't about getting even, it's about reclaiming your power. And I did that by walking away, by closing the door on someone who didn't deserve to stay. Now, I look forward to what's ahead, grateful that I finally took control of my story. And that's the real lesson. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to find out who you really are.